I was 20 years old when I left the country for the first time. I hadn't traveled a whole lot in the US, but I flew to London for a semester in England, and while I was there, had a class on the British Raj in India, studying what colonialism was like, what it looked like, what it did, the political implications, the violence, the economic oppression of it, and also the ways that the global community now is connected. One of the days that we spent in that class was to go to Southall, a neighborhood in London which has the largest population of Indians outside of India. And there we visited a multicultural health center, we visited a trade union, we visited an Indian restaurant for lunch, and one of the places we went was a Sikh temple. Now, I didn't know anything about the Sikh religion, and I didn't know any Sikh people. That was a long way away from my growing up in Springfield, Missouri, or pretty much any of the rest of my life. And so I really didn't know what to expect. We removed our shoes, and we went upstairs, and we sat in a semicircle and listened as one of the leaders chanted from sacred texts, all in languages that I didn't understand. And there came a moment when one of the community members came around the circle holding a bowl, and in the bowl was a dough-like substance that was sweet. And we were invited to hold our hands out, and into our hands was placed a small amount of the dough, and we were all invited to eat and to taste and to share in someone else's tradition, regardless of whether or not we understood the words or understood the meaning of the ritual. We were invited in a gesture of hospitality that wowed me and touched me and invited me to consider how we might be connected in ways beyond words, in ways that stretched across traditions and different religious practices. I'm reminded of that story as we approach the first Sunday in October when Christians celebrate what's called World Communion. And of course, while churches celebrate communion across continents and cultures, we have neighbors in each of those places that are not part of our tradition or part of our denominations with whom we have much in common. I love World Communion because it makes me mindful of what other people's lives are like and how they're similar and different from mine. Several years ago, I was working on a PowerPoint presentation for a World Communion service, and I decided that I wanted to include pictures of communion from churches all over the world. And so I started looking. And I'm fairly adept at doing image searches online, but this was odd because one of the things I discovered is that Protestants don't take a lot of pictures of communion. They were hard to find. And the images I found were often just the elements, not the community. Or just the people serving and not the people. So I started searching by country, putting in specific names of countries to see if I could find the images that I thought might be out there. And at the time, we were in the midst of the conflict in Iraq. And when I put in Iraq and communion, I didn't find images of people sharing bread and the cup. I found images of burned out churches. I found images of destruction, desolation, the results of war and conflict. I typed in Colombian churches because our presbytery has had a partnership with Uraba Presbytery in Colombia since about 2003. And one of the early images I came across seemed to have nothing to do with either communion or church. We might ought to show this image. It was as if a child standing in her school uniform with friendship bracelets around her wrist and her hands covering her face, and a person standing behind her in a military uniform with one arm holding her across her shoulders and an automatic weapon in his other hand. My Spanish isn't very good, and so I couldn't read the caption. And in some ways I didn't want to know. I was so struck by the image, because it made me realize again the way in which my brothers and sisters in other countries and other cultures live their faith in realities that are so far removed from mine. I don't have those sorts of worries for my children. So often, people in first world situations want a faith and a practice that is sweet and naive and comfortable, and so many of our kin and cousins around the world live in dangerous and difficult situations. Their realities convict ours and remind us that we are all God's people. So World Communion is a time to taste and see again the goodness of God, to be convicted by the reality that not all of us share it, to receive the invitation to pay attention to other people's realities so that we might change our own, and all of us draw closer to one another and closer to God. Blessings of this World Communion to all our neighbors, all our relatives.